Hi, I'm Justin Hodge, and today we're going to take a look at the eightfold path for policy analysis. The eightfold path is a process for analyzing policy and is developed by Eugene Bardock. He's a professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy at the University of California. This is explained in even more detail in his book, and the book is called A Practical Guide for Policy Analysis, The Eightfold Path to More Effective Problem Solving. Here are the 8 steps. We're going to take a look at each one in this lecture. Before a more comprehensive look, I recommend getting the book. It's one of those books that you refer back to over time. I actually have one in my bag right now. I look at it often when I'm doing any kind of policy work. So the first step is to define the problem. These are just some general tips that go along with that. Defining the problem is often looked at as the most important step, and it's one that you can revise as you go through. It's an ongoing process. If you're doing a policy analysis for your workplace, the problem may be defined for you. But if you're trying to figure out a problem in your community and to make some changes, it's up to you to figure out what that is, and then you might need to revise it as you go. There are several steps within defining the problem. You want to first figure out how you want it structured. So structure the problem to highlight either an excess or a deficit of something. So here are some examples. There are too many people that need mental health services who are not receiving them. Or the demand for after-school programs exceeds the availability. Or childcare costs are too high for families at or below median household income. So these say that there's either too much or too little of something. It gives you a good place to work from. Looking more at structuring the problem, don't make any assumptions of the solution within the problem. If we look at the previous example, a way to structure that with an assumption would be that there are too few after-school programs. So that implies that if there were more after-school programs, there wouldn't be a problem, and then after-school programs are the solution. That's an ineffective way to structure a problem. It guides the rest of your process. You look for ways that make after-school programs a solution. The problem has to be something that you can evaluate, which is another reason why we explain that problems either are too much or too little of something. So your evaluation of the problem has to be compelling enough to warrant the use of public funds. Typically anything policy related is going to use public funds unless you're looking at a policy that's specific to your workplace. Another point to keep in mind is that government intervention does not solve all problems, and policy isn't always the answer to a problem. Sometimes work within the community or providing education is the solution. From a social work perspective, defining the problem is an attempt to diagnose a problem. And looking at that, it's important to refer to the odds. So when you're trying to understand the certainty. Problems can be designed to be proactive or they can be reactive. It's better to combat a problem in a proactive way before it becomes more of a crisis. It's important when you're doing any kind of policy work that you keep politics in mind, because the political climate is going to determine which policies are likely to succeed and which ones are likely to fail. An effective way to keep the political climate in mind as you define your problem is to use that odds phrasing that I just mentioned on the previous slide. So for example, that could look like minimize the odds that the Green Party will control the state legislature. You'd want to do that if the Green Party were opposed to whatever policy it is that you're writing your brief on. In looking at the political environment, we want to take a look at the language that we use. A policy analysis is aimed at bridging political ideologies and partisan divides. You don't want to develop a policy analysis that is totally just dripping with partisanism. People won't want to read it. Or the people that will want to read it aren't the people whose minds you need to change. So an analysis is always viewed with the current political context in mind. So you might create something that you don't aim to be political, but it will be political. Any policy document is in some way going to be used as a political tool. So you want to avoid the use of issue rhetoric. This is where language is very important. So be careful about the phrases that you use because they'll be used in policy debates or within political environments. So for example, avoid loaded terms such as family values or pro-life. Those have additional connotations that you may not intend on including in your analysis, but if you use phrases like those and many others, it will add to the partisanism of your brief or analysis. Our next step is to assemble evidence, and in assembling evidence, we typically look at 3 different components. We look at data, information, and evidence. We'll take a look at each of these in more detail. So data is simply facts or representation of facts. Examples could include pre- and post-test scores on a depression evaluation. Information would be meaningful data that allows you to make comparisons or decisions. So this is when you would compare those scores that we had just discussed between patients that participated in different treatment modalities. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy versus supportive therapy. We're going to use that comparison to try to decide which one of these is more effective for treating a particular patient population. And then we look at evidence. So evidence is information that's used to influence opinions. So if we keep with the current example, information can be used as evidence that one treatment modality is more effective in treating depression than another. Policy analysis is largely an exercise in thinking and gathering data. You're going to spend most of your time on this step. So gathering data is essential to the analysis, but critical thinking is vital as well. So you need evidence for creating realistic policy projections. So you need this for assessing the problem, assessing the policy situation, and you want to look at different policies that have solved problems similar to yours, whether it's within your own community or within your state, or if you want to look across the country or in other countries. There may be an ongoing policy that seems to tackle that kind of problem. Now, it may not tackle it in the same kind of way as your community, but you can learn something from doing some analysis of that. So in assembling evidence, you're going to review existing literature. You want to take a look at what has already worked, and you want to keep the community involved as you try to develop these policies. So you could hold a town hall or community gatherings to discuss the different policy options that you're looking at, depending on what your role is in trying to define this. On to step 3, we want to try to construct different alternatives. So policy alternatives might not be mutually exclusive. We want to make it clear whether or not they are, though. So as we begin our analysis, you might have many alternatives, but your final analysis should be limited to 2 or 3. When you pass this off to the person that's going to make the decision, you don't want to give them 8 different alternatives to look at. You want to have narrowed it down for them based on what you think is likely to happen. So within each of the alternatives, there might be different variations of options within them, and we're going to refer to those as variants. One of your policy options within the analysis should be the base case. The base case is the present situation, or if things were to not change. Alternatives should be easy to read and short, so reduce it down to a simple phrase. Don't use any kind of jargon specific to a particular field, because people from a variety of fields are going to read your policy analysis. So a quick example, the first administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency it got a policy brief that said, let the states do the work, let the feds give them the money. That was it. Their statement of an alternative should be as simple as that. An example goal, if we wanted to take a look at heroin use, would be decrease prevalence of heroin use in the country by 50% over the next 5 years. And looking at different alternatives, we could look at methadone maintenance, law enforcement pressure, or drug education as potential policy options to solve this problem. So when we take a look at variants within an alternative, they typically achieve the same kind of goal, but by using a different method or using a different funding source. So an example might be whether we use county, state, or federal funds, or through program administration, or should the county, for example, contract with a nonprofit, or should the state get involved. They would do the same action, but a different actor would be involved. You can do your analysis in tiers too, by deciding between the alternatives and then examining the variance. You also want to keep the political environment in mind as you do this. And in doing so, you could develop contingency alternatives. That way, when you pass this off to a decision maker, they could look at the political environment and decide based on that. So for an example, if Democrats control the state legislature, increase the request by 1 million. If Republicans are in control, pursue the goal through existing staff. That's an example of how you could craft a contingency alternative. Another option for policy alternatives is to create upper and lower limits. So if we were to look at increasing the minimum wage, we could discuss doing it between, say, $13 and $15, and then do so in 15-cent increments.